Good morning and welcome to our meeting of the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Would everyone please rise for the pledge and the prayer that I will give this morning. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our gracious and heavenly Father, we're so thankful that you touch us with your loving hands today to awake us to see another one of your beautiful days. Father, we ask you to be with us today as we make decisions to make this county a better place for all of our citizens to live, work, and play. Father, we ask you that you be with those that put their lives on the line for us each and every day, whether they're military uniforms on this soil or foreign soils, our first responders who really put their lives on the line for us each and every day. Father, we ask that you take them back to their homes, whether it be today or whenever they return home, to find everything safe and sound. And Father, when our work is done here today, you ask us that you take us back to our homes and find everything safe and sound. These are all blessings we ask in your holy name. Amen. I have two emails here for members asked to be excused. The first one is from school board member Cindy Stewart. She's this morning that public charities are going to give a major donation to the school board. And Reverend Wallace Flowers, his wife, is in the hospital. He's with her this morning, so we ask prayers for him also. Public comment. Is anyone wishing to make public comment? 3 minutes of public comment. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning.
MPO Board. I'm Jim Davison, 17823 Hickory Moss Place, Tampa, Florida. And I just wanted to come and give my take. I went to the Premium Transit Study public meeting last week, and I wanted to tell you about how I felt about it. The routes that were put forward are same routes that have been there for 25 years. There's nothing new in that. I thought it was an excellent presentation. Thought the public really got a chance to get involved. Some of the shortcomings are some of the same shortcomings that have been going on for the long-range transportation plans for the last 20 years. One of those is that there was only, when you looked at a corridor from Wesley Chapel to St. Pete, you were only able to vote on a single modal of transportation. You could not break that up into rapid bus transit, light rail or commuter rail, and so on. I told that to them, and I think they're going to rectify that. There was no effect of autonomous vehicle technology because this is going to span over 20 years. I asked Jacobs. They have no intention of looking at this. I don't know how the feds will look at that premium transit study if it's not done. I don't know how the state will look at that if it's not done. So I think that that has to be addressed. It will affect ridership. It will affect development, and so it has to be done. And second of all, or last of all in the study, there was no looking at environmental justice study. There was no looking at the displacement of the poor and lower socioeconomic groups, which is a fact. Portland knows it, Seattle knows it, San Francisco knows it, LA knows it. They now have sites where you can go on and actually predict what the displacement's going to be. And I would urge this body to ask the MPO staff to look at those and to incorporate those. Sooner or later, you're going to have to deal with it. The NAACP did sue the Minneapolis Metro company, and they settled out of court under environmental justice. They included 2 new stations in that section of town, and they got $442 million in affordable housing. So it is a factor, and it does increase costs. Lastly, I handed out a GAO study by the federal government concerning value capture options for transit. They wanted to investigate how the federal government could make it important for you to use value capture options. That used to be how they were going to finance transit. That ended after the CIT tax was passed, and has not been included, any portion of or even part of possible revenues in any long-range transportation plans since. I think that that's important. The City of Tampa has the money through tax increment financing to build the rail system. Running it is another problem. So I encourage you to look at that. Thank you for your time, and have a good weekend.
Next speaker is Varun Puri.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Varun Puri from 9517 Eddings Road in Odessa. And when I came to the last meeting, I remember hearing somebody say that we can't compare ourselves to cities like Atlanta, New York, or Boston. we're not big enough, and we're not good enough. I say, why not? I think that Tampa has such a rich culture. We've got all these kinds of things, from a world-class education right at our doorstep to culture, beaches, parks, all kinds of stuff. But I think that the one obstacle we have to unlocking the true potential of this city is transportation, and that's why we're here today. Because if people can't even get to what they want to see, how can we expect them to go and see it? The main problem that I'd like to address is community involvement. And I think that we need to engage the voter base and the youth in this process along with the MPO to include their opinions in what we're going to do. A few months ago when TBX was still a thing, I went around and asked my friends, their parents, my teachers, and a lot of my peers about what they thought about the plan. Not a single one of them knew that $6 billion of federal money was going to fund a standalone toll lane. Not a single one of them thought it was even a mediocre idea. How this even got to demolition was simply astounding. When you ask people what form of transit they want to see in this city, they say three things: put in a rail system, expand the highways, and improve the bus routes. Year after year, from Texas to China, we can see that highway expansion does little to alleviate the problems of transit or even keep pace with the problems, so we know that it's ineffective. Now, the bus routes are already being addressed by the MPO, and I'm glad to see that. But I think that the rail is the one problem that hasn't been watered in a while. Time after time again, we see polls and public opinion that show that voters want rail in this city. The problem is that citizens aren't engaged in this process as much as we need them to be. Look at this room. You've got tens and tens of empty seats. I think that we need to find a way to advertise and market these meetings to the community so that we can include more public opinion into our transit plans. Now, recently I read a Bloomberg article about Moscow where they've implemented a system where citizens can vote on issues from an app. Now, what they can do is they can influence public change that they can see right at their doorstep. So if we implemented a similar system in Tampa, maybe through a crowdsourced app, we would see major improvements in public involvement. We also need to engage young people like myself through community programs. When I was a part of the Mayor's Youth Corps for 2 years, I learned what I didn't see in my American government textbook. Opportunities like these shape our future voter bases. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's the last public comment card I have. Is anyone else wishing to speak before us this morning? Very good, thank you. Committee reports, online comments. Ms. Torres, good morning.
Good morning. Gina Torres, MPO staff. The CAC, the Citizens Advisory Committee and Technical Advisory Committee, forward to the MPO for approval the TIP amendments that you're going to hear about today. The School Transportation Working Group was briefed on a national training program for incorporating transportation and engineering problem-solving activities into the school curricula. They discussed the methodology in the MPO's school safety study for selecting and ranking schools and learned about the county's pedestrian facilities improvement program. The Policy Committee hosted the Vision Zero Coalition Workshop at the Tampa Theater. The workshop focused on the personal stories of local residents whose lives have been touched by traffic violence. A draft of the action plan was provided, and coalition members were invited to share one thing that they commit to do during the coming year to improve traffic safety. The draft action plan will be brought to local governments and then to the MPO advisory committees and eventually to this board for final approval. The Dale Mabry Pedestrian Crossing Study was supported by the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee and the Livable Roads Committee, but the Citizens Advisory Committee had expressed some concerns. So the study is being revised to incorporate their comments, and it will be brought back to that group, to the CAC, and then presented to the TAC and Policy Committee in September. Other presentations to the committees included, there are two on your agenda today, the Hillsborough Air Quality Update and the 2045 Plan Issues for Exploration. The committees also heard presentations on Hart's Transit Development Plan update and getting to school survey results, Selman Greenway Pocket Parks. Lastly, the T-BARTA MPO's chairs coordinating staff directors meeting, and if I read all that acronym, it would be really long. They discussed preparations for the first annual Gulf Coast Safe Streets Summit, which did actually come out of the Vision Zero plan as well. That'll be held February 27th, 2018 at the Children's Museum in downtown Tampa. They reviewed the priorities for the TRIP and multi-use trails program, the need to update 2 of the interlocal agreements to reflect changes in the T-BARTA statute, and they created a box set of 2045 plans for they discussed creating a box set of 2045 plans for Tri-County area of Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco, and then including a standalone regional plan to be adopted by all 3 of those boards. So that was a quick overview. Of course, you've got the whole overview and report in your folders, but I'll go on to the electronic comments that we received. We actually didn't get any Facebook comments this time, but we had 5 people emailed us comments. Those also are in your packets or in your folder. We had 10 emails from Dale Tyndall, and that's focused on fixing the interchange, basically about the interchanges on 275 and State Road 60. Kenneth Roberts wrote an email asking you to make sure that you consider all citizens when you're discussing the TB Next project. And Robert Swalish, he was concerned about the safety at the Boosby Downs entrance to the VA hospital, so there's an intersection there that he wrote about. Rock King wanted to just share his positive experiences using HART. He had some positive things to say about the service he had used most of his life. And then Mauricio Rosa sent an email, and this was forwarding an article from the Trump administration's reversal of hiring local for public works projects, and he just wanted to remind the board that with the upcoming highway projects, he thought it was important that we secure local workers and contractors for that. So that was all of your electronic comments from people.
Are there any questions? Very good. Thank you, Ms. Torres. We have on the consent agenda approval of the minutes from the June 13th, 2017 meeting. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
A motion to second to approve the consent agenda. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise. Motion is adopted. Action items. A, the annual roll forward and HART state of the good repair. Ms. McKinley, good morning.
Good morning. Sarah McKinley, MPO staff. This morning I'm going to go over a transportation improvement program amendment, or a series of amendments that we received from FDOT as well as HART. As many of you already know, the TIP is the 5-year work program. This includes all of the projects and their phases and funding costs for the next 5 years. Today what we're working on is a series of what are called roll forward amendments. These are amendments that were in previous TIPs that are continuing to roll funds forward into the TIP that we approved on June 13th that will become effective October 1. This is the list of the roll forward amendments that we received. There also is included in this a HART amendment. This is for some state of good repair funds. Those will go to streetcar maintenance. This is money that they were already awarded back in 2013, and they sort of want to execute it in the final 5th year before they lose it pretty much. Included in your packet is a comparative report. This shows you each of those projects from before and then what they will look like in the new TIP when it takes effect October 1. And so this is really quick, but we're asking that you approve the TIP amendment that will amend the current effective FY 2017 TIP for the HART funds, as well as amend the 2018 or FY 2018 TIP that will include these roll forward funds as well as the additional HART funds for the streetcar. Do you have any questions? Sorry, I went through that a little fast.
Are there any questions? This is a TIP amendment. We have to have a roll call vote on this. Is there a motion to adopt? There's a motion and a second to adopt the TIP amendment. Seeing no further discussion, please call the roll.
Good morning. Klug for Anderson.
Yes.
Boss.
Yes.
Cohen.
Yes.
Dowdy.
Yes.
Hagan.
Yes.
Zink for Lopano.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Viera.
Yes.
Harmon.
Yes.
Maniscalco.
Yes.
White.
Yes.
Christ.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. 2045 long-range transportation plan issue. Mr. Clarendon, good morning.
Good morning. I'm Rich Clarendon, Assistant Director of the MPO. I'm going to talk a little bit about the upcoming update for our long-range plan. As you know, we have a 2040 plan in effect now, and by the end of 2 years from now, the end of 2019, we're going to have to update that another 5 years and push out the planning horizon to 2045. Those of you who are on the policy committee have already seen this presentation, so I apologize for being repetitive. There is one difference, though, and that is since that presentation was made to the policy committee, we have negotiated a pass-through funding arrangement with the Planning Commission, which will support the long-range plan update, in particular the preparation of small area, we call TAZ, zonal population and employment forecasts. So I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this. So why do we have a long-range plan? For those of you who are maybe new to the MPO or those in our viewing audience, this really is important as it relates especially to what we communicate upwards to Tallahassee and Washington. You can see there are some priority projects that have been funded. These started out being candidate projects in our long-range plan. So we want to continue this process and continue the prioritization of important projects. How does this fit with other efforts? You all know that we have comprehensive plans for each jurisdiction. That generally dictates or provides input on where growth is going to occur. The long-range plan tries to respond to that in terms of what's needed as far as transportation facilities are concerned. And then shorter range plans such as the Florida DOT 5-year work program, the local government capital improvement programs, and other short-range documents generally indicate who's going to build and operate what's in the long-range plan. As far as growth trends are concerned, this is just a graphic that shows actual versus projected population going back a few years and then looking forward to the year 2040. You can see that the actual trends have been running a little ahead of past forecasts. The anticipated growth for 2045 is that if these trends continue, we're probably looking at a population of somewhere around 2 million by the time 2045 gets here. So what does that mean for transportation? Well, the picture isn't particularly encouraging. As I just said, population is expected to expand almost by 50%. Driving trips expected to go up a little bit more than that. However, the road supply, as put forward in our long-range plan, only grows by about 11%, and so congestion is sort of the inevitable result of that. This is just based on, if we do business as usual today. So we're trying to get ahead of that. And how are we going to do that? One way we're going to do that is by putting together some growth scenarios for your consideration. And really, this is a 3-county effort. We're going to be working with our partners at the MPOs in Pasco and Pinellas County to develop some growth scenarios. These are, plausible scenarios for growth in the future out to the year 2045. As I said, one would be based on business as usual, just a trend forecast. However, a couple of other scenarios would respond to major studies that are going on now. The Regional Transit Feasibility Plan that one of our speakers addressed a few minutes ago is one of those scenarios, and that's really what's shown here in the graphic, the corridors that look to be most promising. Those are going to have an impact on future growth distribution should these scenarios come to pass. Same with the Tampa Bay Next concepts. We don't know exactly what's going to come out of that, so I can't show you a picture. That's still to be decided. But we assume that there's going to be a series of major projects coming out of that we will build a land use and growth scenario around. From that, We will do some evaluation and hopefully come up with a hybrid scenario that maybe will combine the best of all of the preceding scenarios and perhaps avoid some negative impacts. So how do we identify specific project needs? Essentially, there are two ways. One is sort of bubbling up from the bottom. These would be some of the projects that have already been identified in various plans from HART, the county, city, some of the MPO studies, priorities adopted by the transportation management area. That's the 3-county area. And then, of course, public comments and requests. On the other hand, there's also top-down project needs that are identified through the Florida Strategic Intermodal Systems Plan. There's some freight planning going on at the statewide level. As I mentioned, the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan and Tampa Bay Next. What else is new? So there are a lot of technology advancements that are going on in terms of connected and autonomous vehicles, shared ride services, think Uber and Lyft, for example. How is that going to change the picture? At this point, we have more questions than we have answers. Will we have complete market penetration by the year 2045? We don't really know yet. We know that DOT has some studies going on at the statewide level to look at some plausible scenarios. Hopefully we can glean some information from that and build it into our long-range plan. But there are some real implications. Hopefully safety performance will become better. Maybe we'll be able to squeeze more capacity out of our highway network. What does it mean in terms of vehicle miles of travel? Perhaps more and longer trips. Again, a lot of this has yet to be proven. Parking supply. If everybody's using autonomous vehicles and you send the vehicle home, for example, do you really need to have surface parking to the extent that we have today? Again, we don't know the answers, but we hope to have some over the next couple of years. Now, this is a graphic that we borrowed from the Atlanta region. This is some of what they called key drivers of change, basic themes for what dictates change or growth in that region. We may have the same, we may have different drivers of change in our district, our area, but we will at least try to identify those. And then, of course, there are always federal requirements. Some new ones are listed here, notably in terms of performance. These are defined in terms of safety, good state of repair or asset conditions, and travel time reliability. These are different performance standards than have been in place in the past, and we're going to have to meet these requirements. There's also some new stakeholders that we need to consult and get involved. So what do we mean by performance? Well, in our last long-range plan in 2040, we identified 4 different major categories of funding, or priorities, if you will. These deal with system preservation, reducing crashes and system vulnerability, minimizing traffic, and providing some real choices when not driving. And we define these in terms of some attributes that are listed here, key attributes for performance that were equated with different levels of funding. So this is just showing what we could expect based on current funding for the most part. Since then, we know that, for example, the county has adopted a program of about $600 million or more funding that will help, primarily with repaving intersections and safety features. So the 2045 funding forecast that we're going to have to put together, the top-down will come from state and federal funding forecasts, largely coming through DOT. The local funding forecast is something we're going to have to work on and put together based on existing funding sources projected out to 2045 and any new sources of funding that we may want to consider. This graphic was prepared for the last long-range plan update. It just shows sort of the scale of funding. If you look at existing funding sources sort of above the dotted line there, projected out over 20 years. And then potential new funding sources below the dotted line and what those might yield projected over 20 years. We know from some phone surveys that have been done over the last 5 years how the public might receive these or react to them. We know that the receptivity to gas taxes, impact fees, and property taxes sort of goes up and down with the economy and fuel prices, whereas sales tax, generally have remained consistent over the years and through many surveys. So how do we set priorities? Last time around, and should we continue this? This is one of those major policy questions. Do we continue basing it on those 4 performance-based categories that I spoke of before? There's also a 5th category that resulted in what we called major projects, major capacity projects. These were focused last time around on what we called key economic spaces. This is where we expect job growth to occur in the future. And as you recall from the last long-range plan update, job growth was a major priority for the local governments at that time. Regional coordination. This is an area that I think is going to receive a lot more attention than perhaps it has in the past. We're sort of under a lot of scrutiny now in terms of how well we're coordinating with our regional partners. So what decisions are appropriate to be made at the regional level and or at the TMA level? Should we be agreeing on growth scenarios? These are some areas that we think we have some potential to work in concert with our regional partners. Prioritizing regionally significant projects. To some extent, this is already going on at both the 3-county TMA level as well as the 8-county TBARTA level. And last but not least, should we be adopting a regional component that is the same across all 3 MPOs? What might scenarios for the Tampa Bay region look like? Again, borrowing from the Atlanta region, these were some what they called scenarios that they put out to the public for some surveys. Full steam ahead, technology-based, encountering fierce headwinds, and then ecotopia. I can't tell you all the details behind those, but it gives you an idea of sort of how the public reacted in terms of being more likely or less likely. So what might that be like in our region? We foresee at least three different roles that the TMA can play in this. One I already alluded to, building the growth scenarios. Another might be to help build a common public survey tool that we can get reaction to some of those scenarios. And then a third might be to recommend funding and cost sharing strategies for the selected hybrid scenario. As far as schedule is concerned, we have about 2 years to do this in. The first year would be devoted to growth concepts. Again, in concert with Pasco and Pinellas MPOs. These would be, as I said, those trend scenarios or transit-oriented that we would hope that would sync up with and be based on the regional transit feasibility plan. If they stay on schedule, we should have some good ingredients to choose from there. And then other concepts that might be coming out of the Tampa Bay Next initiative, for example, a beltway concept. Evaluate these scenarios. What does it mean in terms of travel demand, costs, revenues, what kind of environmental impacts might result from those different scenarios? Are there other impacts? For example, community health. That's another area that we're focused on. That's a change from 4 years ago. And then we would like to get some public reaction. We're thinking spring of next year, spring, summer, into the fall of next year, putting those scenarios out there and seeing what the public feels about them. The second part of the schedule, the second year, really focuses on what we can fund and what we can afford. Again, the hybrid scenarios, public engagement running from January of 2019 through May of 2019, allowing the public to weigh in on the hybrid scenario, what they like about it, what they don't like about it, providing a choice, including a choice of no new funding. And then, again, at this point, we think that if DOT holds to its schedule, the results from the supplemental environmental impact study that's going on now on the Tampa Interstate study should be coming forward at about this time. So we would hope to be able to wrap that into our long-range plan considerations. Review and adoption takes place in the fall of 2019. We do have to have a public hearing, which would probably take place in November or December of 2019. So these are some of the policy questions that we put forward to the policy committee. Should we continue to focus on those job clusters, what we call key economic spaces? What should we assume in terms of local funding? And then should we have a jointly produced and adopted regional component? Now, I mentioned the interlocal agreement at the top of my presentation. This is a pass-through funding agreement so that we can, as we have in the past, coordinate on growth projections and come up with one uniform set of growth projections jointly developed with the Planning Commission and our local governments. A joint selection of consultants to help with that effort. The Planning Commission would fund or provide funding up to $225,000. We don't know if they're going to need all of that, but that's what's the maximum that's allowed. And we would recommend authorizing the chairman to sign that agreement today. So with that, I'll stop and see what kind of questions there might be, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Clarendon. I have a question before. At the beginning of your presentation, you showed the population growth trends countywide. I have a question on that. I'm not a demographer, but it showed from 2010 to 2015 under your actuals, we're at probably 1.2 million. And at 2015, we're at 1.4 million, which is about 200,000 people increasing over 5 years, which gives us 40,000 people per year. But then from 2015 to 2025, you only go up in your 10-year forecast, I don't know if it's you or whomever is doing this, to 1.6 million. Would that 1.6 million actually be in 2020 instead of 2025?
So let's go back and look at that.
Or are you expecting a downward turn in population growth, or a plateaus, or stays it where it is? I mean,
no, I think we're continuing to grow, and we expect growth to continue. The forecasts really come from the Bureau of Economic and Business Research at the University of Florida, which is sort of provides what we call control totals. And you know, I think that they adjust those all the time, from time to time. So what we're showing here is what was forecasted back in 2010 and year 2000 versus actual population trends, you know, that are based on harder sources like census.
because if we're not looking at a downturn, in 2020, we'll probably be at 1.6 million. In 2025, we'll be over 1.8 million. So if everything remains the same, just when I looked at that, it just didn't make sense to me. Like the figures were off. Okay. You know, I mean, everything you talked about really is looking at the growth of the county.
Indeed it is. And I should have probably stated that these are not what we're going to build into our plan. This is just what was shown a few years ago. When we, for example, execute that agreement with the Planning Commission, we would expect to look at this again and really come up with some harder forecasts.
Any other questions? Commissioner White, you recognize.
Thank you. I have some questions. Unless I'm missing something, because I have my agenda in electronic format in Dropbox, but I see an Exhibit A mentioned in the agreement, but I'm not seeing the exhibit in my backup materials. Was that provided to the board members?
Yeah. Oh.
is this Exhibit
That's a good question, and I don't see it in my backup either, but we'd be happy to provide that to you. Essentially, it's, I can paraphrase, go from memory, but it's basically to look at breaking down the county's control total that I spoke of earlier into small area projections, and to base that on what's in our locally adopted comprehensive plans. We can provide you with that. It's really a draft scope.
Well, I mean, I don't know how comfortable I am really voting on this item today when the board, wasn't provided with a, key exhibit that really spells out the scope of work of this study. But, I suppose I could support it with some things in mind. It does say in the contract that this will be a joint endeavor between the MPO, Planning Commission, and our local jurisdictions. With that being said, I would like to see officials from each local government that's represented on this board to be informed and engaged in this process. The local governments, particularly the elected officials, are the land use decision makers, which is critical in this process. And in the case of the school board, they're the decision makers on school resources. And the city and county governments, as we all know, are faced with budgetary realities that come into play when we're looking to implement this sort of a plan. So I suppose I can support it today if I can get a commitment from MPO staff to offer to meet with each and every local elected official whose boards are represented on this board on a one-on-one basis, even if they don't sit on the MPO, so that they can gather their feedback and concerns as we go through this process. And I would like to see that offer extended to senior staff members on each local government that's represented on this board as well. And finally, I think it would be important for either an MPO staff member or the study researcher to make a presentation to each of the local governing boards, Hillsborough County, Tampa, Plant City, Temple Terrace, and the school board.
Commissioner, why do you put that in the form of a motion?
I can certainly put that in the form of a motion, especially in light of the fact that we don't have this exhibit to take a look at. So, I'll make a motion to direct MPO staff or their designee to offer to schedule one-on-one meetings with each and every local elected official from local governments represented on this board, to extend the same offer to senior staff members for these governments, and for that person to make a formal presentation at a public meeting to each of the boards as well.
A motion by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Merman. Commissioner White, let me get a clarification. Are you also in that motion making the motion to accept the 2040 long-range plan transportation agreement?
Sure. So if the second to the motion agrees, I'll make a motion to approve the item, to accept staff's recommendation with the amendment that I've offered.
There's a motion by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Merman. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed to likewise. Motion is adopted. Thank you, Ms. Clary.
Thank you.
I have one question.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Merman. You're recognized.
Can I just wanted to ask a quick question, because I am on TMA, and I did go to the regional premium transit thing they had at the History Center. What I want to make sure is that we're not duplicating any efforts that the Premium Transit Group is doing with HART and DOT, because I see a lot of surveys and outreach, and I know for 6 months next year they're going to be doing complete outreach. I mean, they're really going to be extensively out in the community. So I'd like to see you coordinate with the Premium Transit Plan group maybe they can use you to do some surveys, but I just want to make sure that we're not going down separate paths here, that we're all traveling in one direction together, because when they bring that plan out, it's going to be on us to accept it and sell it to the community in a big way. So just wanted to bring that up to you, and I know you guys do a great job doing outreach in the community.
That's an excellent point, and we actually have a meeting with the Premium Transit Feasibility Plan team tomorrow morning to talk about the next steps. We're also coordinating really closely with the Tampa Bay Next team.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Zornita, good morning. MPO
Good morning,
Executive
Melissa
Director review.
Zornita, Executive Director of the Planning Commission. Thank you for your vote on the last item. We look forward to working through the population and job forecast for 2045 with you all. This item is some follow-up to your discussion a couple of months ago regarding the MPO Executive Director evaluation. At that time, there was some discussion of providing Ms. Alden a performance increase and questions about whether or not there was funding in the agency budget. So I am here to affirm that yes, there is money in the agency budget to provide her with a merit increase, and accept your direction as to how you would like me to implement that. Thank you.
Motion by Commissioner Merman, second by Councilman Vieira to adopt the recommendation from Ms. Sorda in giving Ms. Alden a 3% merit increase. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, let them know by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise. Motion adopted. Dinner's on you.
Thank you.
I think that was on June 13th.
Status report. Ms. Alden, Regional Priority Projects Overview.
Thank you so much. And we have, here we go. So you have representatives from this board to several regional groups where we coordinate and agree on priority projects that are important to us all around the region. So just as a quick reminder, since we update this every year, currently your representatives on the MPO Chairs Coordinating Committee, which is for the 8-county area. Commissioner Miller is chair and Councilman Cohen is vice chair. The Hillsborough County representative on T-BARTA is Commissioner Kemp, and our representatives to the Tampa Bay TMA Leadership Group, Councilman Cohen, Commissioner Merman, Commissioner Kemp, and our alternates are Mr. Lopano and Mr. Anderson. So after our review of regional priorities at the TMA meeting this past year in June, the TMA Leadership Group members requested some time on the agenda for us all to, just focus a little bit on what are those regionally significant projects. And I encourage you to ask questions. I think the purpose of this was for us all to just get a better understanding of what's on the table in terms of regional priorities. So I just alluded to 3 regional groups. Here's how they relate to each other. The MPO Chairs Coordinating Committee is 6 MPOs. It was formed in 1993. In 2016, it merged into T-BARTA for a unified voice and also for more efficient administrative support. The CCC meets twice a year, and the core MPOs, Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco, meet 5 times a year. The staff directors meet monthly. That's for all 6 MPOs, and are advised by 3 staff teams focusing on different types of regional tasks. So CCC has a long history of getting funding for regionally significant projects. I just wanted to show you this because this is a slide that we had a number of years ago. This goes back to 2001. The CCC adopted priorities that all got funded. It does take a little while for projects to get funding, but over time they do progress and move through, for example, the strategic intermodal system funding. More recently, the Gateway Express project in St. Petersburg has been funded, and there are a number of regional trails projects. The Courtney Campbell Causeway Trail, for one, was a major example, and then more recently some Sun Trail projects. So that's just to give you a sense of where this comes from. TBARTA and the CCC typically come together on a list of major projects for West Central Florida in advance of the legislative session. So last December, these included this list of projects that you see here: the Howard Franklin Bridge replacement, the I-275 State Route 60 interchange near the airport, the Gateway Express project in Pinellas, TBX starter projects, the State Route 5456 corridor improvements in Pasco County, just north of us, Suncoast Parkway 2, extending that up through Citrus County, Airport West Shore Multimodal Center, and connecting that to downtown Tampa and the airport, and then 2 projects in Manatee and Sarasota counties. 6 of these are in the Tampa Bay Transportation Management area, and the TMA Leadership Group reviews its priorities towards the end of the legislative session and prior to each of the MPOs holding a public hearing on priorities. So this year, the TMA Leadership Group made several modifications to that TBARTA CCC list, responding in large part to the TBX reset. So, for example, the Howard Franklin Bridge, the I-275 State Route 60 interchange, the TBX starter projects, those were all rolled together into one priority that was called Interstate Modernization Projects. And I'll show you the description for that in just a moment. We also grouped together some transit priorities and identified the need for a regional transit catalyst project. So something to kind of jumpstart and show that transit can be successful in this region. So that also rolled together several different projects. State Route 5456, as I mentioned, continues to be on the list. And then we also added a couple of new projects. So one was improvements on I-75, specifically at 2 interchanges. One being the Big Bend Road interchange, which actually ties back to that key economic space discussion. And also an I-75 interchange up in Pasco County that would be a new interchange north of 54. Waterborne transportation was added as a new priority this year after, I think, our successful pilot program. And CSX rail corridors, just in terms of right-of-way preservation. Let's start working with CSX now so that we have options in the future for use of those corridors. That was on a second-tier list of TBARTA regional priorities and moved into the TMA Leadership Group priority list. So after the TMA group makes its recommendations, each MPO integrates the regional priorities into their MPO priority list to take to public hearing. So here's how we do it in Hillsborough. I know that this is a lot of fine print, but we put those regional priority projects at the top of our list of major investments for economic growth. So these are anything that is major capacity is going to be in this category. Last year on our priority list, we had a number of different TBX segments. What we showed this year on our priority list was that those were all grouped together with a project status request that reflects the TMA Leadership Group's language. So funding for reconstruction of 2 interchanges, interstate modernization including technology, reevaluation of the environmental impact statement, and locational studies for transit centers in the Gateway and Fletcher-Fowler areas. So moving down the regional priority list, again, you can see the TMA group's language in the request column. So I mentioned the regional transit catalyst projects. Some of the ones that were called out by our leadership group members in June were the Central Avenue BRT, which connects downtown St. Petersburg to the beaches, the West Shore Multimodal Center and connections to downtown and airports, as I mentioned earlier. Further development of the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. Regional Express Bus with a number of different opportunities. And elevated transit in the State Route 60 corridor from downtown Clearwater to Clearwater Beach. So these are all potential projects that the leadership group wanted to put forward Again, any of these are going to require a partnership between the local government and the state for those to be successful. And you can also see on this list where we have added the Big Bend Road at I-75 interchange improvements and the waterborne transit project. There is one category of funds that focuses specifically on regional transportation projects. It's a 50-50 match program called the Transportation Regional Incentive Program. It's a state program. Priorities for this have been set by the CCC since the program was created back in 2006. And so just real quickly, I wanted to share with you that we have gotten a number of projects funded through TRIP, even though it is a relatively limited amount of funding. And we continue to update the unfunded project list so that hopefully we can advance some of those projects into the funded work program. And where those show up on our list, again, this is under major investments for economic growth. You see Big Bend Road at I-75 is a category for, is eligible for TRIP funding under the potential funding sources. Also the Regional Fare Box project. So. And then finally, the regional multi-use trails priorities. Again, these are developed by a staff working group that looks at objective criteria similar to the TRIP program. And we continue to work on advancing projects from Hillsborough and from around the region. A number of these have also been prioritized by the TMA leadership group as being significant to our Tri-County area. And those include the Tampa Bypass Canal Trail, which would help connect central Tampa all the way up to Wesley Chapel, and the South Coast Greenway and Maydale Bridge. So those two appear on our priority list. These are in the real choices category. So just highlighting some of those: Tampa Bypass Canal Trail, the South Tampa Greenway, the South Coast Greenway, and you can see where we're identifying that these are eligible for Sun Trail. They've been prioritized by the CCC. So what happens next with these projects is after the MPOs adopt the priority list at public hearing, that's of course transmitted then to the Department of Transportation, which then seeks to try to match up eligible and prioritized projects with available funds. And so we are hoping to have a draft of their work program update in November, in time for the November board meeting. And hopefully we'll have some more good news this year. Questions?
Councilman Gordon, you recognize.
Can you just go back to the original, the slide with the priorities that were identified by the TMA group? Mm-hmm. Because I just want to point out for everyone's benefit, we spent a lot of time on a couple of these items, particularly number one, interstate modernization projects. The decision to change the language to that and to have supporting language about using technology was a direct reaction to the discussions about TBX and Tampa Bay Next. And it was our attempt, I think, and Commissioner Merman, correct me if you disagree, Commissioner Kemp is not here, but it was our attempt to make the regional group, to help the regional group to understand the challenges that we have in Hillsborough that I don't really think they have in Pinellas and Pasco. So changing that language was very significant because it meant that the entire regional leadership, I think, opened up their mind to something other than just what had been presented by TBX and to sort of putting all of the options on the table. And that was a pretty significant and time-consuming discussion. And then the other thing is the CSX rail corridors being moved from the second to the first and the waterborne being added. These were changes that were made from last year to this year. And if you look at the top 6 priorities, and if you've seen the map that is being looked at related to the CSX corridors, these are very Hillsborough-centric, these 6 priorities. And I think that it was it was really good that we were able to get Pinellas and Pasco to sign on to this and to recognize that in order to really move forward as a region, the Hillsborough needs really were the ones that to a great degree needed to be addressed at the beginning. So this, I think, was a pretty major step in terms of how our region, our county, fits into the overall regional plan. I think it recognized the needs that we have here, and the others sort of got on board with that.
It was a very substantive discussion.
Yeah, I mean,
there was a lot of back and forth, but I think everyone came away with a better sense of where the different parties are coming from. I think that we're going to be having discussions, hopefully not as dragged out as that one, but having again some substantive discussions as we move into this process of developing scenarios for growth for the Tri-County area. So looking at, for example, what if we did the most that we could with transit-oriented development? What would that look like? Pinellas leadership is very interested in exploring that topic. I think we could explore that as one of our options. If you take it to its logical extreme, what could it actually do for you in terms of congestion? On the other hand, what can we do with autonomous vehicles and autonomous transit, and with working with the Department of Transportation on those interstate corridors to try to get a transit strategy out there as rapidly as possible? It might not have the same TOD benefits, but it might be shorter term, might be less expensive. So anyway, these are decisions that I think we need to be having a discussion about with our regional partners, and the TMA leadership group meetings, I think, are a great opportunity to do that.
And I think, I know our next one is on September 9th, and I believe that we are getting an update on the FDOT HART regional transit study at that meeting. So
yes,
that
we'll be leading off with that.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Sims? Hillsborough air quality update.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Sims. I'm with the Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County. I'm here to talk today, just provide an update on air quality. I want to thank you for having us, because we want to emphasize the importance of the relationship between transportation and air quality. That's why we have staff that sit on several committees, and we've been giving this presentation over the past 2 months to several of those committees. Wait, what's happening here? Okay, well, I'll have to wing this by, apparently I got the wrong PowerPoint that I...
We may have both of your PowerPoints open.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me check real quick. Okay. All right, now I'm back on track. Sorry about that. Basic background, I'm with the Air Management Division, as you might imagine, and we operate several sections that evaluate air pollution in general. So this is just kind of an overview, but as point sources, the power plants, the fertilizer plants, gasoline terminals, we're out there evaluating what's coming out of their stacks and so forth, permitting and compliance. We have an asbestos section for demo. Open burning, we have oversight on that, and then more of a nuisance-related, our noise program is very active in the area. But the focus today, obviously, will be on our air monitoring program. This is one of the most comprehensive ones in the country. Why are we doing this? This is probably fairly obvious for everybody here, but us as humans and animals in general, we all share the need for respiration. The quality of the air that we intake into our lungs has a direct effect on our health, especially over the long term. So the ability to absorb the proper amount of oxygen is related to our air quality. Bronchitis, asthma would be side effects of poor air quality, and it can lead to cardiovascular issues. I think everybody's pretty well aware of that potential issue. So we monitor the 6 criteria of pollutants. These pollutants have all been identified by EPA as harmful if they're in excess levels. The top 4 are really the primary ones related to transportation, when we talk about emissions from vehicles and so forth. And we are in attainment for all of those. Just as a point of interest, the last 2, we are non-attainment for those. Those are, but in localized areas. Those are directly related to point sources or manufacturing facilities that release these in higher quantities. And in this map here on the left, you'll see we operate 12 continuous monitors throughout the county. I'm kind of circling the 3 here that are clustered. That's related to one of the lead sources. I know that's an element of concern, so we have them clustered around that facility, and it's monitoring, and same thing with SO2, and they're taking measures that are bringing them back up, hopefully into attainment shortly. Also noticed on here are our various sites. One I wanted to point out because of what we're doing is the Monroe site. It's just a little bit west of downtown. It's also highlighted in the picture on the lower right. This is a site that was added in 2015 specifically for transportation-related emissions. It's different in several ways to our normal sites that are operated for EPA references, but this site is, that's North Boulevard and Interstate 275, so it was chosen specifically to be near one of the busiest segments of roadways in the county. And it's measuring it's intended to evaluate diesel emissions in particular, very small particulate, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides. So we're still early in the process because it's still a new monitor, but the data is showing kind of a correlation that we expected between peak times and the stagnant traffic leading to higher emissions, which is what we would expect. The numbers are not in excess of any levels of health-based concerns, but again, we're still kind of moving on because it's a newer monitor, but it is one of interest. And then, really, I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about ozone, because ozone is the pollutant when we talk about transportation that's the most difficult to comply with. It's been ratcheted down over the years. In 2015, it went down further from 75 to 70 parts per billion, and that's very tight for us specifically in this area. And as I go forward, I'll show you a little bit as to why. Just a little science background. The ozone is actually formed through the combination of 2 pollutants and sunlight and heat. So it's kind of a mix, and we have a seasonal issue with this. So May and September are typically our highest months, especially May, because of the weather conditions and the intensity of the sunlight in combination with all of the emissions that can be going into the air. So you'll notice that the transfer, when it comes to nitrogen oxides, a precursor, the transportation is a significant element, more than half, which is, it's kind of interesting because it used to be that it was more of the manufacturing sources 20 years ago. But as regulations have been enacted, they have better controls, and then in the volume of cars on the road, it's led to where now transportation is taking a lion's share of this component. And then also, when I talk about ozone, I always like to make this clarification. We hear about the outer atmosphere ozone. That's the good ozone. That's the ozone that's protecting us from some radiation and so forth. But down at ground level is where it can have respiratory and other health effects and issues. So what are the potential impacts of non-attainment? We are in attainment. I don't want to confuse that with anybody, but if we were to go non-attainment, there are potential issues when it comes to NPO and transportation. The original Clean Air Act established a relationship, but it was really ratcheted up in 1990 when they added these amendments, and it established that link between transportation and air quality planning. So if we were to go non-attainment, it's a rather rigorous process. Very staff intensive. State plan has to evaluate all of the pollutants and then identify the one of concern and develop a series of goals and plans for meeting that. The congestion mitigation and air quality process kicks in and directs how the money has to be spent, and it has to show conformity, which is basically no net increase on any project to emissions. And it involves extended staff time, modeling, and an additional process. There are also other things that could be related to tighter emission controls on point sources, which can get into other factors and cost and relocation concerns of those businesses. But the good news, we are in attainment, as I mentioned. But it was tight, and it's a little tricky that the average comes from what we call the design value is the 3-year average of the 4th highest value per year. And I know it's a little small to see, but if you notice on the left, the state of Florida, the entire state is in compliance, but Hillsborough County is the highest. It's the highest of all the ones in there, and that has to do with the meteorology and just the way we are designed and the fact that we are a transportation hub. So it is one that we monitor. As you can see on the right, our averages are still below the 70, and it has to be less than or equal to 70, so we're okay. Year to date, we're 68 for this year, so we would have to have a really large spike later this year, which is not expected, to go into non-attainment. And of course, if we did, we would be in immediate contact with MPO about the implications and what we'd have to do move forward. So we are feeling good, but watchful about it. And then one thing to talk about too is, the focus is on transportation, but there can be some outside influences. I mentioned, you had the 2 precursor pollutants. Well, earlier in May, as you might recall, there's a little hint there, we had an extensive issue with fires around the state of Florida. This map is showing 27 fires during this week that were all over 300 acres that were ongoing. Not shown is several that were in Georgia that can also impact the entire state depending on the flow of the winds and so forth. These are all generating a large amount of nitrogen oxides. So it was wreaking havoc with the monitors. And you can see on the right, all of these are various counties and stations around the state that showed exceedances of 70 during that period of time. So we believe that there is a definite correlation. Right now we're standing pat and just keeping that acknowledged, but if we were to go non-attainment, there would be the opportunity for us to petition EPA to see if these could be discounted from the average. However, that is, from what I understand, a very difficult and process because they're already taking the 4th highest average. So but it would be something we would pursue if it got to that point. So just some follow-ups on things since we're talking about air quality. These are items that we just recommend that the board consider as they go forward in the realm of air quality. Most of them are in line with the mission of the MPO already, so they're not groundbreaking ideas, but just as reminders. And the promotion of alternative transportation, I think, is one of the big ones that we are looking forward to. The carpooling and the van pooling and even off-peak scheduling, promoting that. Public transit, of course, and then some of the alternative fuel options. I mean, you've seen the success and heard about it from the Downtown Partnerships Downtowner, and it's popular. It's an electric vehicle, so it's in a congested area with not generating any emissions, so that's always a good thing. Hart's been converting with CNG. I think they're looking at some electric. They have a pilot program with their Hyperlink and using electric Teslas on the first and last miles around USF. So those are all items that we would certainly recommend that the board continue to consider. And then just a few of the initiatives that we're involved with. We have a modest fleet, including today I drove in our electric vehicle, charging across the street right now. So, those are things we try to lead by example where we can. We have a CNG sedan for natural gas, try to make fuel economy a factor when we evaluate any replacement of vehicles and so forth. At public outreach, we have a big event downtown where we feature the vehicles out front just to allow the general public to learn more about them and to become interested in electric and so forth. We're founding members of the Clean Cities Coalition, which is a local whose mission is to eliminate diesel usage essentially or greatly reduce it. And so we've been engaging with many other members around the region on that. And then the other one I mentioned is staff route optimization. We try to evaluate where staff are going. We have members that they do, like the monitoring group has the same monitoring route the same day, so we were able to identify a remote location to park the vehicle, like at a county fire station. The employee lives further away. He's able to get it on the way back in, not have to come to the office and drive back, saving time and fuel for air quality and money, which is always a positive thing. So just kind of finishing up in a summary, as I mentioned, these are the air quality index evaluates your the number if you exceed the healthy levels, and you can see that we have a few on average each year. There's no specific trends on ones. The ozone in red is the most common. You can see the 3 for 2017. That all occurred during the May when the fire season was going on. We have a system in place to advise the public primarily through the media, and then we have one through our website where if anybody free of charge can be notified immediately if we are going to issue advisory, so they'll know about it as soon as it takes place. So that is it, and I will be open for questions.
Any questions of Mr. Sims? Seeing none, thank you,
Great,
sir.
thank you.
Executive Director's report.
Thank you. And Councilman Cohen mentioned we have a TMA leadership group meeting next week on Friday. I think that's the 8th. It's at 9:30 a.m. at the AECOM office on Rocky Point. We also have coming up some community working group meetings for the Tampa Bay Next process that will include information about the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan, and also we'll start carrying out to those community working groups an overview of the scenario planning process and how everybody can get involved in helping create those scenarios. So would those start out on September 19th in West Shore at the Center Club? I think that's at 5:30, and then September 25th downtown at the Barrymore Hotel at 6:30. And then finally, I wanted to thank everyone who came out to our Vision Zero workshop last week. We had a great event at the Tampa Theater and premiered a short video telling the stories of 4 folks whose lives have been forever affected by traffic violence. And HTV is now playing that video. I think it'll be on after this meeting. And we are encouraging everybody to take the Vision Zero pledge. It's up on our website. And we have a raffle drawing which we'll do at our December board meeting for everyone who has taken the pledge by then. Then the winner will receive 2 tickets to a Bucks game in December.
Still winning, that's good.
It's always good. And thank you.
Is any old business? Any new business? Seeing none, we're adjourned.
Yeah, I think I'll do that. Probably next year.
Hi, I'm Janet Doherty, and I proudly serve as the Executive Director of the Environmental Protection Commission. Our mission is to protect Hillsborough County's natural resources, its environment, and the quality of life for our citizens. 2017 marks the EPC's 50th year of environmental stewardship, leadership, and service to our community. Today we are excited to share with you the history of our unique journey to bring environmental excellence to a changing world. Our story begins with Terrell Sessoms, who introduced the EPC Enabling Act to the Florida legislature in 1967.
I enjoyed sailing, and I had a little 16-foot sailboat. And I sailed out from Davis Island into the bay, and I noticed immediately